Now we're four misfits who don't belong together. We're playing for the other misfits. They're the outcasts, right at the back of the room. We're pretty sure they don't belong either. We belong to them. Bohemian Rhapsody is mostly directed by Bryan and is starring Rami Malek, Lucy Boynton, Gwilym Lee, Ben Hardy, Joseph Mazzello, and Aiden Gillen. As always, there will not be any plot spoilers in this review. This is the long in development and probably long-awaited film about the band Queen, and more specifically, not only about the band Queen, but that of their very famous, very well-known, amazing frontman in Freddie Mercury. And this film chronicles the years of 1970, the origins of the band, and all the way up to their Live Aid concert of 1985, which is one of the most crowning achievements in probably rock and roll history, and one of the best performances ever as well. And this film chronicles the ups and downs they went through just becoming a rising band, and also the ups and downs of the personal life of Freddie Mercury. The reason why I say this film was mostly directed by Bryan is because he was actually fired pretty close to near the end of this production, and they brought in another director of Dexter Fletcher in order to finish the principal photography and see the film through post-production. Dexter Fletcher is probably more well known for his more recent film, that being Eddie the Eagle starring Taron Egerton. But he was brought in because there was a lot of tumultuous things happening with Bryan during this production. Apparently he and Rami Malek did not get along at all. Apparently he would go AWOL when there were days where he needed to be on set in order to film things. So Fox decided to just get rid of him and have someone else finish this production. But when it comes to certain guidelines within the Directors Guild, there has to be a certain amount that a new director does with the production in order for them to get the credit, so therefore Bryan is still the credited director of this film, although it's probably not his original vision or his original end product. But with that being said, I did rather enjoy watching this movie. It does have some problems with it, which I'll get to later, but first off, one of the main positives of this film, something that I've seen in many reviews and just seen people talk about over and over again since this movie came out, is Rami Malek's portrayal of Freddie Mercury. His acting ability, his range in this film, what he is asked to do from a physical standpoint and an emotional standpoint, I think is completely and utterly fantastic. He is probably the major reason I would tell people to watch this movie, and he does the most he possibly can given the framework of this film, given the PG-13 rating, which is something I'll get to a little later. He's able to be emblematic of the persona of Freddie Mercury on stage, singing the music, doing the moves that Freddie Mercury would do on stage. Apparently he was trained by a choreographer to get all of the mannerisms of Freddie Mercury down to a T, and it really shows on screen. But he is not only able to be dramatic, he's able to also be very comedic as well, to give the character some sense of levity to him, because the film does delve into some of his more darker things within his life, and that's when I think the film really becomes something extra. When we get into a lot of the thematic layering is more towards the second half of the movie. The first half of the movie, without giving away any spoilers, is the rise of Queen. We see via various montages and band sessions and recording sessions, we see how all of the classic songs that we know and love were put together. And those scenes are great because you see kind of the magic within them. But when the film takes a more personal turn towards the Freddie Mercury character, is when the film really gains a lot of its value for me personally. It delves into certain themes like how alone Freddie can feel, and also how isolated he is, despite the fact that on the surface and when he's acting towards others, he's very personable, very social, but underneath there is a lot of personal anxiety and a lot of personal things he's dealing with. A lot of that has to do with keeping his sexual identity a secret, keeping it from not only his band members, members, but keeping it from people more close to him. That is when we get the involvement of Lucy Boynton in the film, who plays the love of his life in Mary. Mary is based on a real-life person who was a romantic person within Freddie Mercury's life and also a very close friend. They were a couple for many years. They got engaged and all this kind of stuff, and the film really shows the importance of that friendship and that relationship. And Lucy Boynton, I thought, was really fantastic in the movie. I would have liked to actually see more scenes giving us more context about that relationship, because I thought when they were on screen, there was just a fantastic dynamic between the two. But when the film delves into more of the darker side of what Freddie Mercury was into, the film becomes a little murkier in terms of telling us many of those details. Like I said, this film is rated PG-13, and the film cannot be as dark, as gritty, or be as serious as I think a lot of what Freddie Mercury was into for it to be portrayed accurately. What we get in the film is more hints and more contextual type things where we can kind of put things together ourselves. One of the most kind of questionable aspects of this movie is the film depicting his sexuality, his homosexuality specifically. People can interpret Freddie Mercury's homosexuality as a negative thing. They can interpret it the way it's depicted in the film as something that leads to his inevitable downfall, dealing with his health and personal things. And that's not necessarily what the film is saying, but that is the way in which people can interpret it. And the film really needed to do a better job of showing the positive aspects of Freddie Mercury's sexuality. But with that being said, there are a couple more positive things in the movie. The music within the film is, of course, completely littered with all of the hits of Queen, so therefore it is fantastic. The musical sequences of the band performing I thought were really fantastic. The costumes of Freddie Mercury, or the clothing that he wore, is great. The period piece setting I thought was depicted very well when it came to the hairstyles and the clothing and the cars and all that kind of stuff. I thought was really accurate to the time, and it showed the progression of going from the 70s into the 80s, because as we know, just looking back, there was a difference between the 70s look and the early 80s and 80s look in general. I thought all the acting by the other band members were very good. They definitely casted extremely well. The other actors that they got to be the other members of Queen, they look really accurate to their real-life counterparts. That was really fantastic to see. When it comes to the more negative aspects I have with the film, the first thing here is kind of not really a big negative for me, but it may be a big negative for some. And that is the fact that with all biopics, whether it be about a band, a person, an event, a war, or whatever, facts are of course completely changed or negated to make the film feel more cinematic, to make it feel more like a story that fits within a movie. And of course, with that, there is a formula that this film adheres itself to. It's pretty much the biopic formula that we see for many bands. You know, the rise and fall, the certain plot points it has to hit when it comes to, you know, the disgruntledness within the band and all this kind of stuff. And the film really adheres itself to it so much that it can be distracting if you really notice it. For me, I kind of just accept it for what it is, accept it for being something that is inherent within this kind of subgenre, so it's not a huge negative for me. Another negative I have with the film is that there is a fantastic, amazing sequence at the end of this film which depicts Queen's performance at Live Aid. Not really a big spoiler. And while I was really into the sequence, there are certain moments of it that were really over-edited. Like, they just kept cutting from Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury on stage, cutting back to the crowd, cutting back to him, cutting to Brian May, cutting to backstage. It's just so wonky and over-edited that I'm like, you don't need all of this. You can kind of cut it down a little bit and just give us the performance, because that's pretty much what you're doing. You didn't have to over-edit it like that. Also, that end sequence featured some moments where they used green screen CGI in order to show the crowd, and it really showed how not good it was. There are some sequences where we see Freddie Mercury and we see the crowd behind him, and it's clearly green screened, and it really shows. And that's not a good look for the movie. It really kind of takes me out of that great sequence. But I think the film itself suffered from some editing problems. Specifically early on in the movie, the first I would say, act of the movie is not great. It's very rushed. It's very obligatory to, like I said, that formula that these types of movies stick to. But it's not something that I think breaks the film for me in any way. All of these negatives don't really break the film for me in any way. So with all that being said, I'm going to give this film a 3.65 out of 5 stars. Rami Malek is amazing as Freddie Mercury, probably the reason to watch this movie. It's a fun, entertaining film filled with great Queen music that we all know and love. The film's negatives are the fact that it is set within that more generic, formulaic rubric that we've seen so many times. The PG-13 rating kind of holds it back from being a little more serious and having that extra dramatic punch that I think the film was trying to go for, and the editing can be a little wonky at times, specifically during that last sequence. That has been my review of Bohemian Rhapsody. If you like this video, please check out the other videos on my channel.